The Sturmgeschütz III, or StuG III for short, was a German assault gun and the most produced, full-tracked armored fighting vehicle of that nation during the Second World War. Despite being designed for infantry support, it received a long 75mm gun in 1942, which significantly increased its firepower against tanks. As the tides turned and the Wehrmacht began fighting a defensive war on all fronts, StuGs fell into their element as potent tank destroyers. But despite their success, further enhancements in firepower were considered. One such consideration was to rearm the StuG III with an even longer 7.5cm gun, derived from the Panther tank project. By incorporating the longer gun, the StuG III would have been capable of engaging enemy tanks from greater distances and with more penetrating power. Another project developed in parallel involved reusing the diminutive chassis of the VK9.03 light tank, which was to be armed with the same large 7.5cm L70 gun. However, neither of these projects progressed beyond the proposal stage, likely due to various factors like resource limitations, shifting priorities, and the evolving nature of the war. The StuG III was conceived as part of Germany's efforts to develop armored vehicles to support its infantry. It was designed to provide direct fire support to infantry units, particularly those in close combat situations. The concept for such a vehicle had been evolving within the German military for some time, influenced by experiences in the First World War and subsequent developments in armored warfare. The StuG III was based on the chassis of the Panzer III tank, which was already in production by the late 1930s. This allowed for a more rapid development process, as many existing components could be utilized in its design. While the initial prototypes were developed in the late 1930s, the production did not begin until 1940. The Germans were aware of the possibility that these vehicles would encounter enemy tanks. Nevertheless, because of their battlefield role, StuGs were mainly equipped with high explosive rounds. These rounds were not designed for anti-tank purposes, but could cause significant damage to softer targets, structures, and lightly protected vehicles. When facing more heavily armored vehicles such as enemy tanks, proper armor-piercing rounds had to be used. In the early stages of the war, the standard armor-piercing round of the StuG short-barreled 7.5cm was able to penetrate around 40mm of armor at a distance of 500 meters. For most tanks of this era, this was enough. After 1941, Germans began encountering better protected enemy tanks in ever greater numbers, like those of the Soviet Union, such as the T-34 and KV series. This prompted a shift in tactics and the repurposing of existing equipment to deal with these new threats. Thus, a decision was made to upgun the StuGs, which had already frequently assumed the role of an ad hoc tank destroyer on the field. It was hoped that the new, more potent gun would further improve the anti-tank effectiveness. This decision was driven by necessity, as the Germans faced a shortage of dedicated tank destroyers and were in urgent need of effective anti-tank capabilities on the battlefield. The relatively low profile and decent armor for the time made the StuG well suited for the conversion of this role. While it lacked a rotating turret like traditional tanks, it could still effectively engage enemy armor from concealed positions or ambushes. In 1942, Germans introduced the 7.5cm PaK-40 anti-tank gun to counter the threat posed by enemy armor. Initially designed as a towed gun, it was unsuitable for mounting inside armored vehicles in its original form, and several modifications were required before it could be adapted for this purpose. These alterations resulted in the development of the 7.5cm StuG 40 L43, followed soon after by the slightly longer L48 guns. The installation of such a gun was tested on a modified StuG III in early 1942. Shortly thereafter, production of the upgunned StuGs commenced and would continue until the end of the war, making it the most produced German full-tracked AFV. After 1941, Adolf Hitler increasingly interfered in major military decisions, including vehicle designs. He was obsessed with installing the biggest possible armament and the best possible armor to every new vehicle, which subsequently often led to overly ambitious and impractical projects. Despite the effectiveness of the long 7.5cm guns, Hitler was adamant that the StuG III's firepower had to be further improved. With the development of the Panther tank project, a new 7.5cm L70 gun was created. Thus, in September 1942, the German Army's Weapon Office discussed the development of the so-called Sturmgeschütz III, or Assault Gun New Type. This project essentially went in two different directions. One of them was to simply continue the development based on the existing Panzer III chassis. The other was to create a completely new vehicle. The former offered the option of reusing some already existing production capabilities and parts, which would greatly reduce the development time. The problem was that the Germans would need to reuse a vehicle that was not initially designed for such a large and heavy armament. and would thus have to heavily modify the overall design. There was simply no guarantee that the existing Panzer III chassis would be sufficient for it. The latter option was to build such a vehicle essentially from scratch. This was a more tempting solution, as the new vehicle could be custom built for the given task of mounting the bigger gun. Once again, multiple proposals were made, one of them being the rather obscure 7.5cm PaK 42 L70 mit Kugelblende auf VK9.03 project, with little to no information of its origin surviving to this day. The VK9.03 designation referred to the Panzer II Ausf H and M vehicles developed by MAN. These two were initially built as a response to the German Army's attempt to replace their 4x4 and 8x8 wheeled armored vehicles with highly mobile light tanks. In 1940, drawings of a new vehicle were presented to the German Army. The proposal proved to be satisfactory, and soon orders for 6 prototypes were issued. 2 different variants of this vehicle were to be adopted. The first, designated Panzer II Ausf H with a crew of 3, was to be attached to the Panzer regiments for reconnaissance operations. The second variant was designated Panzer II Ausf M and had a 4-man crew. The difference from the previous variant was that it could use the superstructure turret taken from the VK9.03 light tank, better known as the Panzer II Ausf L Lux. Despite plans for a substantial production order, they never materialized. Following the construction of a single incomplete prototype, further development of the project was halted. Issues with the drive components coupled with shifting priorities ultimately led to the cancellation of the project in early 1942. Based on the few available sources, the project to convert these light tanks into a tank destroyer appears to have been initiated on the 12th of September, 1942. However, the specific individual or authority who ordered it and the responsible party for developing the initial drawings remain unclear. It can be assumed, based on the fact that the VK903 was originally an MAN project, that this company was the one that proposed it. The possible first drawing of this vehicle was dated January 28, 1943. Unsurprisingly, the death of the VK903 also killed the proposed assault gun variant. The overall VK903 L70 chassis design would have closely resembled that of most other German tanks. The front part of the hull housed the transmission, followed by the crew compartment, and the engine. The vehicle was intended to feature a torsion bar suspension system with 5 overlapping road wheels. It included a front drive sprocket and a rear idler wheel, but lacked return rollers. Additionally, 2 large shock absorbers were installed behind the first and last road wheel on each side. The VK903 light tank was to be powered by a Maybach HL66TP engine providing 200 horsepower. With a relatively light weight of 10.5 tons, this vehicle theoretically could achieve speeds of up to 60 km per hour. The assault gun variant would have been heavier than the tank version though. This would have likely had negative impact on the overall drive performance, but the exact extent of this impact cannot be determined. On top of the hull, a simple superstructure protected the crew and the gun. The front plate housed the main armament in the middle. Additionally, there were 2 observation ports, one on the left side, intended for the driver's use, and another on the opposite side, likely for the loader. This port could also serve as a firing port if needed. Atop the superstructure, 2 two-part hatches were planned. Adjacent to the left hatch, a small opening was designated for the moving gun sight. The sources do not specify the armor protection of this vehicle. Given the weight limitations, it would have had to have been quite light. For a vehicle that would, in addition to tank hunting, have to operate in a close-range infantry support assault gun role, this was far from perfect. The long-range capabilities of the 7.5cm L70 would have been advantageous while the vehicle was performing other tasks, but nevertheless, the overall design would have been compromised by its inadequate protection, leading to a poor survival rate. The main armament chosen for the vehicle was the 7.5cm PaK 42 L70. This gun provided superior penetration over the L48. However, integrating the L70 gun posed challenges due to its increased weight, longer recoil, and larger ammunition. These factors had to be carefully considered during the vehicle's design process. The L70 gun was to be centrally positioned inside the enclosed superstructure. It would have been protected by a large box-shaped gun mantlet, followed by a thick protective barrel jacket. To mitigate recoil effects during firing, a ball-shaped muzzle brake was installed, which was a direct copy of the muzzle brake used on early Panther tank prototypes. The considerable length of the gun would have caused mobility issues, as the driver would have to be very careful not to snag it on various obstacles or terrain. This would have been a serious problem requiring constant attention from both the commander and driver. Furthermore, the heavy armament would have imposed significant stress on the front suspension, and the whole vehicle would have probably been quite unbalanced. Given the small size of the chassis, it's likely that this vehicle would have accommodated only 3 crew members: driver, loader, and commander. The driver's position would have been located on the front left side of the vehicle. Directly behind the driver, the commander would have been seated. In addition to commanding the vehicle, the commander would have operated the gun and been responsible for observing the surroundings for potential targets. The loader was probably on the other side of the gun. Besides loading duties, the loader may have also served as a radio operator and potentially operated secondary armaments like a machine gun, if they were ever incorporated. It seems that this vehicle remained merely a paper project, failing to attract significant interest from the German army. The main problem with the Sturmgeschütz III project was that the Germans simply included too many different proposals without arriving at a final design. In January 1943, Albert Speer informed Hitler that this problem had to be resolved shortly, as constant changes in the overall design would ultimately lead to a huge production delay. All projects that were deemed unrealistic or could not be implemented in a short time were discarded. This also includes attempts to rearm the StuG III with an L-70 gun. After some consideration of available resources, it was decided that the best option was to proceed with the development of such a vehicle based on the Panzer IV. This would eventually lead to the creation of the Jagdpanzer IV and its better armed version known as the Panzer IV 70V. The term Jagdpanzer or tank hunter in connection to the improved assault gun projects may be confusing. While the overall story is long, essentially what happened is that at some point the new Sturmgeschütz III project was hijacked by Heinz Guderian. While initially intended to perform the role of infantry support, operated by the artillery branch, it was instead allocated to the panzer branch of the army and allocated to dedicated anti-tank units. This concludes our look at this obscure attempt to upgrade the StuG performance. What do you think about a light chassis to carry a Panther's gun? Do you think it could have never worked, or was it just wishful thinking on a napkin drawing? Share your opinions in the comments section. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider Patreon or PayPal. Your contributions help us to create more engaging videos. Until next time, stay focused and stay tuned.